Hello, how you doing? Firstly, before I start, I would actually like to ask everyone to give Mick a big round of applause because the work and effort that he puts into to 17x and each of the events is phenomenal. So thank you for all that you've done, Mick. Alrighty, so I don't know how many of you were paying attention in 1998, 1999 to the Port Stephens under 11s athletics competitions, but I was a pretty big deal. I've always been a bit of a trendsetter, trailblazer, etc. And I was at the forefront of the participation trophy movement. You can see on the left. Um, so that I'm a big fan of participation trophies. Namely, it was the springboard for me to go on and win a couple of other swimming and running and swimming, and a few years later the cricket one. But I've always had a pretty fond memory of my sporting attributes as a child. A few Christmases ago, my wife Jackie, who's in the front row, asked me if I wanted to go to the local pool to do a few laps. And I was like, oh, it's a lot of happy memories. I'd love to go. As I went through the turnstiles of the Tomaree Aquatic Centre, I had pretty high hopes that I was probably going to get close to breaking the world record for the 1500 metres. Anyway, about 75 metres in, I blew up. I honestly thought I was about to drown. And I looked over to my left, and Jackie was just gliding past, about to finish her third lap. And I reckon there's a few execs and boards around Australia at the moment that are holding on to some past glories when it comes to what they were great at compared to what the skills that they need now. And the reason why I bring that up is there is a lot of changes happening within corporate sustainability, and what has got us here is definitely not going to get us there. Many of you who had the pleasure of sitting through Econ 101 back in the day would know the circular flow diagram. And so the circular flow diagram, it's taught to you on the first day. It talks about the relationships between households, firms, the market for goods, and the market factors of production. It's very simple to understand. You have 4 areas, you have 4 arrows pointing between the ones and the way that they relate. Unfortunately, we now know that that is not actually how the economy works. This is how the economy actually works. And I've even called it Econ 2025. Yes, there are factors of production, that is correct. However, they are not operating in a bubble. And in order for those factors of production to be efficient and effective at what we need them to be doing, we need to understand how that sits within society, and we also need to know how that fits within the resources that we have access to on the planet. And this is where we're seeing a massive shift within the corporate space at the moment, because we know, as Mick said in his intro, 67% of global emissions come from the corporate sector. So we know that it's a massive player. That's not an industry split, that is a total economic split. Some of you would have heard of donut economics. Maybe a few of you have heard about planetary boundaries. This is those combined. So donut economics, we want to be living in the green circle. We want to be below the ecological roof. We want to be above the social floor. Unfortunately, we're not doing great on either. It's not doom and gloom by any stretch, but it's certainly a wake-up call. One piece of positivity that I'd love to bring to your attention is the ozone layer. So that was red. I don't know, I'm sure many of you remember the reason we all had to, like, no hat, no play, slip, slop, slap, etc. The hole in the ozone layer was going to get us. So actually, following the Montreal Protocol, that ozone hole is very close to closing up, because we changed the aerosols that we put into the atmosphere, and so we have reduced our impact on that planetary boundary. There's a lot of work that we have to do for the rest. Now, I know we're all sick of looking at the iceberg diagram, so I went for a volcano instead. The volcano, I think, is apt, because these are the physical and transition risks that companies are now having to face. there is a lot of work being done both by the investment community, the corporate community, and also the insurance community to understand what is the exposure that each of their investments have to these physical risks. What is that going to do in terms of evaluating their attractiveness from an investment perspective, but then also where are the opportunities to expand market share if each of these are proactively dealt with. Some recent studies that have come out have us dropping 15% GDP by 2050. To put that in context, the Australian government gets very upset when GDP drops by 0.25%. So this is a really big deal. And then worst case scenario, or not worst case scenario, but a bad case scenario at 4 degrees increased temperature globally by 2100 is minus 40%. And that is horrific. So we're not going to let that happen, but it's important to know that that is possible. So what are the positives? So since 2005, there are over 30 countries that have managed to decouple their economic growth away from carbon. The reason why this is important is because you can see each of these countries are from every continent. And since this was published in 2020, they've also been joined by countries such as China and India, who are rapidly decarbonising their economies, because we know from an economic perspective, it doesn't make sense to not decarbonise. So why should you listen to me talk to you about economics? So I went down my first mine shaft when I was 4 years old. I don't think it would be approved today, but back then it was a backwater mine down in Illawarra, and my dad wanted me to see where he worked. I then sat in a car for over 15 years of my childhood listening to work calls, sites being built, sites being commissioned, people being rolled off to other projects. I've been around the mining and oil and gas industry my whole career. In fact, my first job out of uni was recruiting electrical engineers into the LNG projects in Queensland. And I learned a lot. I learned how to read a single line diagram to understand an electrical system. I learned how to fit 8 meetings in a day in Brisbane by flying on the 6 a.m. from Sydney every month for 4 years, or so for 3 years. But I also learned when speaking to electrical engineers, whether they would like to speak to a potential hiring manager, you got to be direct. No fluff, and if you waffle at the start of the call, it's always going to be a no. There's a very good lesson to learn as I went through my career. So I've been fortunate enough to live in a few countries, 4 continents in total. I've been in New York, DC, North Yorkshire, Durban, South Africa, and now down in the Northern Rivers. I've worked in recruitment, I've worked in tech, I've worked in tech advisory, I've worked in marketing, and I've realized very early on that my true skill is bringing people together. Sorry. So 17x, July 2022. I'd been speaking to Mick, a business, I had a business with a friend of mine, and I was chatting to Mick, and he's like, you should come down to Sydney to 17x. I reckon you're going to love it. So this was an unbelievably large pivot in my career. So in these photos, you can see Mick, who you recognise. You see Tom Dawkins, who you just saw in the video. You can see Ronan, who I spoke to this morning. He was meant to be in Sydney, and he's currently sitting in the back of the room. So thanks. Yeah. But around this time, I also met Gary Morgan, who is also in the room. Following this night, I actually connected Gary Morgan with Tom Dawkins, and the bus that came up from Sydney to the Social Enterprise World Forum actually came through Byron Bay. And that was because I went to this event. And so I started to see all of these people that I was meeting who were phenomenal individuals, that I wanted to bring them together more and more. So around end of 2022, I was trying to figure out, what do I do next? Came up to Brisbane, had coffee with Gary, and Gary, my wife Jackie, Katie, Vicky, Davina, Tom and Luke, who many of you will know, and Ali, really became my springboard for a few reasons. A, it was spring. B, they were kind of an advisory board, and then through that springboard, I was able to kickstart Ocelli. So I was looking at the corporate market, and I was thinking a few things. So customers are starting to demand this, investors are starting to demand this, regulators are starting to demand this. Insurers are going to be demanding it more, employees are going to be demanding it more, and then the civil license to operate, social license to operate, however you want to frame it, was going to become more and more important as companies had to prove what they were doing. So I found myself sitting in a cinema at the end of 2022, listening to a Q&A with Cedar Anderson from Flowhive, and he started talking about bees. And my business model, I realized, was about cross-pollination. So the next day I went home. I sat on the couch, A to Z, through the glossary. Didn't even create a shortlist. Hit one name, Ocelli. It's a secondary visual system that a bee uses to navigate via the sun. And I had my business name. It perfectly encapsulated everything that I wanted to be doing. So I refer to it as impact as a service. Some people call me a broker. Some people call me, I've been called a lot of things. But the one that I really love is sustainability concierge. And what it means for the client is that no matter what they need access to, I already have a partner to introduce them to. What it means to the partner is that they get to focus on delivering work, and I can find the opportunities for them. And this is an absolute sweet spot of where my career has brought me to. I was actually chatting to Ronan 2 weeks ago, and he was giving me the space to think, as he does very, very well. And I said, Ocelli is my business model because I love making connections. I don't love making connections because Ocelli is my business model. And in that moment, I knew I'm doing what I'm meant to be doing. This is what I'm really good at, and I get to see that every day when I'm making these introductions. I want to quickly give you an overview of the values that I've put at the core of Ocelli. So not only be the conduit and unlock the silos, but also really live George Mack's quote. Networks are unique because they don't divide when you share them, they multiply. And I literally think about that every single day. There is such a multiplier effect of turning informal referrals into a process that people can trust and can come back to you time and time again. You're welcome. William, I can repeat it. Perseverance. So you're not seeing double. It is not a word in a dictionary. However, it is the combination of perseverance and resilience. And I love it because no matter how many good conversations you have in this space, you will always be challenged by people wanting to make sure that you have the answers that they need in order to make a decision. We've probably all heard this a lot. I actually fell in love with this when I found out that it's from 1915. Now, we've had this for a very, very long time, 110 years, and it's still as relevant today as it was back then. And despite the way that I started this presentation, I really do try to reduce the complexity. And I love this quote by Upton Sinclair. It is difficult to get a man to understand something when his salary depends upon his not understanding it. So if that is the case, this quote does not say it's impossible, it says it's difficult. So if it is the case, figure out the levers that they need to hear in order for you to get the business case over the line. The best way I think I can do this outside of Ocelli is I've been on the organising team of Climate Action Week Sydney for the past 2 years. I've launched a podcast called The Green Fix with Loreto Gutierrez, which really brings together business leaders from across Australia to talk about how can sustainability keep talking about the commercial benefits so that they can expand the tent of allies as far as possible. So it is about speaking the right language to the right audience. The SDGs are what I do, but they're not necessarily how I do it. But these, for me personally, are the guiding areas for the Ocelli Group and how we can have the largest impact. But this chart is how I speak to business. And this is how I really need to understand when I'm speaking to someone what's most important to them. Are they looking for growth? Are they looking for risk mitigation? And how can sustainability fit in with that? Finally, because amazingly, I think I'm gonna hit this time, Mick. Um, some really, I think, important stats for people to be aware of. So first and foremost, renewables have gotten so cheap, so cheap, and like the business case for them stacks up so quickly. But once it's put head to head, particularly with solar. But the other piece is really thinking about where is the investors' money going. The investors' money, $2 trillion of it, was put into renewables last year globally. Like this thing is going off to the races, and I think there's a lot of positivity from a tipping points perspective that is going to set us up really nicely for Australia to become a leader within the decarbonised world. So, wouldn't be a good talk without some action points for you to take back to the office tomorrow. Firstly, you need to find out what group your company is in when it comes to mandatory climate reporting. There's 3 groups. Group 1, 500 employees plus. Group 2, between 199 and 499. And then Group 3, 50 up. Figure out where you're at and figure out who is responsible for it internally. If there's not someone responsible for it internally, you may be able to create a role for yourself. Really importantly, where is the stakeholder pressure coming from? One of my favorite realizations that I've had in the past 12 months is often the best ally to have internally at a company is either the head of sales or head of account management, because I promise you they're going to start hearing about it from your customers, and they know how to get things done internally because they're a revenue generating area. And then the final bit is constantly remembering, how can you externalize for leverage? The sustainability request should never be coming from you. You should be the messenger for sustainability based on what one of the stakeholders has requested. And I do love my quotes, so I'll leave you with one more. So this is from Ed Miliband at COP last year, his UK's Secretary of State of Energy Security and Net Zero. He said, but I think the other change is that the economics have moved in one direction. And that's why I think this transition is going to happen and why I think it's unstoppable, because the economics and the ethics, if you like, have joined together. And what I mean by that is, whether you're doing this for dollar value, whether you're doing this because you believe it's the right thing to do, it is the right thing to do. Thanks.